Yes, thank you. So I've got today with me Emily Botch and Nick Davis. They've put together the initial viability assessment for local water done well. So the key for today, we're going to go through, I guess, a bit of the background, some of the legislation, building on some of that work that was presented at the Regional Collaboration Day, touch a bit more on local water done well and the water service delivery plan. And within that water service delivery plan, when we look to make a decision on the recommended option, we have to look at our current delivery model, kind of as that baseline that you compare alternatives to. So this piece of work that we've engaged Beck and Martin Jenkins to do was that initial look at our current water service delivery, and that's what we're here to present today, is the findings from that. So some background. So obviously there was the Havelock North outbreak in 2016, which really triggered the need for reform, both through water services delivery and the regulation of drinking water standards. In 2020, the previous government set out the intentions of their water services reform, and those were the entities throughout New Zealand. Then in 2023, they changed it from the 4-entity structure to 10 entities. And then in 2024, the current coalition government introduced local water done well, repealing the previous government's reform and introducing their own policy. That was going to be put through in 3 separate bills, the first bill being the actual repeal in February. The second bill was the preliminary arrangements bill, and that was enacted in September of 2024. And that's really set the clock ticking for councils to develop their water service delivery plans. And then the third bill, which is set to be introduced in December, will outline the enduring policy settings. Now, some of that policy has been tipped. That was in August. And that relates to the new planning and accountability framework required. So essentially, Three Waters will be taken out of the LTP. They'll have to develop their own water services strategies, and then they'll have to report annually on that as well. So essentially setting out what you will do, then reporting on how you did on your expectations. That will be overseen by economic regulation, which will be set up by the Commerce Commission. And then there will be increased environmental regulation, mainly with trade waste standards, and the requirement for Three Waters finances to be ring-fenced and to be financially sustainable. And we'll touch more on those financial sustainability metrics further. So as we go through this and develop our water services delivery plans, these are a one-off transitional document. So they provide that look on the current state of our network, and that's what we'll talk about later on down the track. It will outline the needed investment in infrastructure to meet regulation and compliance, and illustrate financial sustainability by 2028. We'll be required to consult with community on our water services delivery plan, where we'll outline the attended delivery model and how we will actually implement this. Now, these plans can be developed jointly or as a standalone council. Just got a bit of a timeline. It's not the nicest looking timeline, obviously. It's a bit busy, but up top there is the legislative outline of what's currently going to happen, what has happened. What I do want to point out is that September 2025 in red, which is that deadline for us to develop and submit our water service delivery plan. There is an opportunity to seek an extension in July. Now, the criteria for that has not been announced, but most likely it will be for those councils looking to submit a joint plan, just so they can ask for a bit more time, as you can imagine trying to arrange the finances and projections across multiple councils would have its challenges. Here is our regional look. So we've obviously engaged through the RRA to look at a joint model. So they are doing current modeling on that. We anticipate to workshop that with elected members in the near future, with hopefully having some sort of guidance this side of Christmas. And then the consultation requirements. The reason for having something decided this side of Christmas was allowing 4 weeks for consultation and then 4 weeks of hearings after that, so an 8-week consultation period. Now, consultation is something that we'll have to discuss a bit more in detail as we go down the track with what a preferred model would look like. Just wanted to outline what the different service delivery models were, or what have been announced in legislation. Now, these aren't fixed. DIA and Commerce Commission are open to alternative delivery models if councils choose to present them. But the 5 main that they have outlined are the internal business unit. You can think of that as the status quo, but the reality is the status quo will have to change. So it is how you're currently delivering, but within the parameters having to meet the new legislative requirements. The second is the single council-owned water services CCO, a multi-council water services CCO, and then it goes into the mixed ownership consumer trust or full consumer trust model. Through legislation, they have put some, I guess, financial benefit to looking at a single council or the multi-council CCO, and that's essentially your gearing through the LGFA. They're making it possible to borrow up to 500% of your revenue in borrowing if you join a CCO or create your own single council CCO. So engaging with Becken and Martin Jenkins, we looked at that current state, and we looked at the method of delivery. I'll give you a bit of an overview of our network. I want to highlight the non-compliances that we currently have within our system, and then one of the other challenges we have, which is under delivery of our capital program. So currently we deliver our water services through a mix of in-house and outsourced delivery. Operations and maintenance is about 90% conducted in-house, with about 10% being outsourced, mainly in the electrical sector. In terms of the capital program, that's the other side of the equation. About 90% of that is delivered through external consultants and contractors, while 10% is delivered in-house. With the water supply, there's approximately 28,000 connections and a replacement value of $350 million. Want to note as well that based on age, roughly around 70 kilometers of pipe needs to be replaced within the next 5 years, and an additional 14 kilometers by year 10. Within wastewater, connections are roughly the same, higher replacement costs, but there's roughly 223 kilometers of pipe that needs to be replaced in the next 5 years, an additional 30 kilometers by year 10. I do want to say that those are suggested based on asset age. That does need to be verified through CCTV and physical inspection, but it gives you a scale of the renewals that are required to meet an aging infrastructure. So the non-compliances, currently our water supply is non-compliant. We do not meet the standards for protozoa and bacterial protection. We do have those at site, but because those bores directly feed into the network as a whole is viewed as non-compliant. We have 12 resource consents expiring over the next 10 years that will need renewing and will need investment in infrastructure to meet those compliance standards. And a big one there is our wastewater discharge consent expiring in 2037. There's 2 elements of that. There's the outfall pipe that will need replacing, and as well, we are unsure of what the new regulated standards will be for wastewater discharge, so it should be assumed that additional investment will be needed in treatment. And then financial year 23, we did not reach the target service levels of water supply and stormwater. Just a quick note on the under delivery. So right now we have a very reactive renewals program. Basically, if it's leaking, we fix it rather than having something planned based on asset age and condition with inspections. And then historically, our CapEx, we do not deliver our actual versus budget, averaging about 62% over the last 5 years.
Andrew, can I ask a quick question? When you say, through you, Mayor-wise, when you say targets not met for service levels, is that a response time or a completion of service requests? What is that?
Yes, good question. I got that from the annual report, and I think that was complaints-based versus what we set out for as our target. I believe in terms of response time, we're actually within those targets quite well. It was more complaints for water supply, odor and taste. We received more complaints per 1,000 connections than what our target was. I'm not too sure if that was outlined in the report. If not, we can find what that kind of metric was.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that through the annual plan and report process? Yeah.
So risk and challenges going forward, again, those non-compliance as we discussed, so some large capital projects required to meet current and proposed compliance standards. Just that overall asset age and condition, so trying to transition from this current reactive method into a planned renewal program, and then as well requiring additional investment to actually clear that renewal backlog, the resource consent expirations, and then just delivery of the actual capital program. And then currently, we're working to a 3-year plan as opposed to this traditional 10-year LTP, which just adds a bit of an extra layer of complexity to our current state. So Martin Jenkins and Beck have come in to look at that with an assessment. Probably pass on to Nick and Emily to discuss more of the criteria for the assessment, how it was approached, and then discuss further what the metrics of revenue sufficiency, investment sufficiency, and finance sufficiency actually mean in the context of a water services delivery plan and achieving that financial sustainability by 2028.
Thanks, Andrew, and good afternoon. So yeah, in terms of how we've approached this, so what we're doing through these viability and sustainability assessments is we're trying to anticipate what the future requirements are under local water done well, particularly in terms of those ring fencing and financial sustainability tests. And we're using that framework essentially to kind of look at your existing service delivery and your existing projections contained in your plans to determine whether or not they would meet those requirements under that. So it's really about kind of giving you some foresight around what the challenges are, how far away you might be from meeting those requirements, so that you can then take that into your planning as you work on the water services delivery plan. So in terms of how we're approaching the assessment, we take a holistic approach to that. So we start with an understanding of the operating context. Every council's different. It's really important to start with an understanding of the population, the community, the assets, the current state of those, the service performance levels that are being delivered to, compliance with the drinking water quality assurance rules, what's happening in terms of resource consent and compliance, and what's coming down the track in terms of resource consent expiration, as well as those customer service measures that Andrew was just kind of referring to. So understanding that sort of context is the first part of it. We also look at historic financial trends and understand the sort of the cost drivers and what that looks like as you kind of take those through into your 3-year and sort of 10-year plans. So we look at your LTP projections or those 10-year projections, and then we sort of apply the framework, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide. And I just want to sort of make a couple of points there. So one is, under a big driver of local water done well is ensuring that water services are set up on a financially sustainable basis. That's the sort of the government's policy, and they've defined that in the Act, in the Local Government Water Services Preliminary Arrangements Act. And there are 3 legs to that stool, really, in terms of financial sustainability, and we'll come on to those in the next slide. So that's revenue sufficiency, investment sufficiency, and financing sufficiency. But we consider, for the purposes of these assessments, that it's also really important to consider a couple of other dimensions. And these are not, strictly speaking, part of that financial sustainability test, but they relate to resource sufficiency. So has the council got the internal capacity and capability to kind of deliver the plans that it has set out for itself? And if not, do we need to be thinking about building in additional resources into those plans to kind of ensure that that sort of practical aspect of sustainability is met? And then the fifth of those, which we know is of interest to most councils around the country, is the affordability element. So what are the projected revenues? How do they translate into price increases and increases in water charges for customers. So those are the dimensions that we're looking at through the viability and sustainability assessment that we're sort of talking about today. You just go on to the... So just a little bit more on the key financial sustainability tests. So I mentioned there's sort of three legs to that stool, and these are the lenses that the Department of Internal Affairs and the Commerce Commission will be putting over the water services delivery plans when they're received. So the first of those is revenue sufficiency, and the basic question that's being asked there is whether the projected revenue, and this is water charges, so whether that's targeted rates, whether the revenue is sufficient to cover the full costs of water services delivery, including depreciation and the servicing of debt. So that's that first test. The second one is investment sufficiency, and here this is more of a test against the compliance requirements. So here the question that is being asked is whether the Council's plans contain investment that is sufficient to maintain assets, meet the regulatory requirements, being the drinking water and the environmental performance requirements, and provide for growth. So that's a second lens that's put over it. And then the third aspect is financing sustainability. So given those things, is the Council able to borrow to finance the investment and stay within sort of the prudent debt limits? So those are the three aspects that we're looking at, particularly when it comes to financing sustainability. So it's worth pausing there just in case there's any questions before we go on to the actual results.
A lot of information.
Yeah.
I've just got a question around the resource sufficiency. Do we have any guidance on whether or not that's like the delivery arm, I guess, of the water services as well as, say, the planning? So there's sort of two sides to the delivery of asset management and actual physical assets in this space.
Yeah, that's right. So Emily may wish to comment, but in particular we've highlighted through this the under-delivery of capital historically. And so there I think the questions, that's not just a council issue, that can also be about the market and the industry capacity to build and those types of things. But there it is worth considering that when you're looking at an increase in the scale of the investment program and in the context of historical under-delivery, there's a question there around the resources available for planning, design, consenting, procurement of capital works. So that is kind of one area that we would highlight as being worth closer inspection as you kind of go through the water services delivery planning process. Emily, I don't know if there's anything else on the capacity side you'd add?
I would also add, you've got your planning and consenting, the different phases of a project lifecycle, but also really important to understand is the decision making as well, capabilities. So that's not only just at a staff level, but also at the governance level as well. You've got to have the right people available to be able to make the decisions. And if you've got an enhanced program, you've got a lot of decisions to be made in quite a short period of time as well. So that then you sort of start thinking about how do you stagger it? So how do you actually then plan and prioritise your projects so you can maximise the use of your current resources and you don't end up having resources that are not needed some years but then needed again in future years. So there's a real art to actually putting together a program together that's sustainable in the longer run, not just financially, but also in terms of deliverability and resource management.
You look like you were...
Follow up.
Right, carry on.
Okay.
So here we kind of come on to, I guess, the findings against those lenses of revenue sufficiency, investment sufficiency, financing sufficiency, and affordability. So we're going to step through each of those in turn. So what this chart is showing is your projected revenues from water activities. So in our full report, you'll see that we've done this analysis for each of water supply, wastewater, and stormwater. What we're presenting today is the aggregate view across the three waters. So the dotted yellow line is your water revenues historically up to the financial year that's just gone, and then for the 10 years forward from financial year 25 onwards. And you can kind of see the upwards trajectory there, and then that starts to ramp up towards the end of the 10-year horizon. We've also got the operating depreciation and interest costs here. And again, you can see that there's been an increase in costs historically. So operating costs have increased by around 44% over the last 3 years due to higher depreciation, maintenance costs, and higher interest costs as well as debt has increased. And that is projected to continue throughout the 10-year horizon. So it's increasing on average over that period by around 5.7% per annum over the next 10 years. And what you can see is that in terms of the revenues, they're not sufficient until the very last year of the 10-year horizon to cover those operating costs inclusive of depreciation. And as a result of that, you can see on the grey line at the bottom that the water accounts are operating in a deficit position. That does improve over the course of the 10 years, but those deficits are around 22% of revenue when you accumulate those over that period. And so our understanding, based on how the department and the Commerce Commission will look at this, is that they would likely conclude that that would not meet the revenue sufficiency requirement under local water done well.
And that's assuming that everything goes to plan and nothing goes wrong and there's no more cyclones and all of that, that we become even. It's a big assumption.
Yeah, and I guess that is, that's right. And, but when it comes to the assessment of the water services delivery plans, it's very much going to be that forward-looking view and how that transitions over time. Emily, do you want to comment on the investment sufficiency?
This is the investment sufficiency. So this is looking at what we actually need to do in order to meet our current levels of service, our growth and our renewals. So one of probably the key points to note is the renewals there are in yellow, and you can see the black dotted line there, which is our depreciation. So we're actually the amount we're investing in our renewals is quite substantially a lot less than what our depreciation is. Now we know you've got quite a lot of ageing assets, and they are at a point of failing. There is your current levels of service in terms of I&I and your wastewater networks show that you've got a lot of infiltration and flow going into your wastewater pipes. So there is a need to lift up that level of investment. I think you all know that. And then, of course, we've got the level of service and then the growth on top of that. One of the key points to note is through these water service delivery plans is that over the next 4 years, we need to ensure that the growth investment in Three Waters matches your LTP. So even though through this process there'll be a divergence between your LTP and your water service delivery plan, we need to make sure that the water service delivery plan provides for those growth projects that you've got in your LTP.
Can I ask a question, please? What if we combine with other councils? How does that affect this graph here?
So, you go.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that piece of work is currently being conducted through the Regional Recovery Agency. And yeah, we're hoping to be able to present to elected members by end of October what some of those initial findings will be. So in preparation for that, we wanted to present our findings here, what we look like, to then look at what a joint or multi-council option would look like, to then ultimately make the decision.
Okay.
The other point I'd like to note here as well is through the new legislation, which has come in after you did your 3-year plan, we need to ensure that you are compliant with your drinking water standards by the next 4 years. The current plan does not enable that to happen. There's not enough financing available in the current plan, so we need to do a reprioritisation. That's not included yet in this graph. That work's currently underway. So the next 10 years, we do need to make a change in the next 10 years to ensure that you're actually meeting those compliance requirements as per the legislation. There's also a few projects as well that I'd like to note, especially with the wastewater outfall and the risks you've currently got with an ageing asset. And then also, as we pointed out previously, which is the level of service in terms of your stormwater as well. Those, and there's the Enfield Reservoir. Those 3 projects alone are very significant and really do make a quite big impact in terms of your profile. So some decisions need to be made as you're doing your water service delivery plan on how you're going to manage those significant projects that are actually needed, as well as, you know, just keeping the lights on essentially and ensuring that you're providing a good level of service to your community. Hayley.
Might be directed at maybe Russell, maybe. Just in previous discussions we've had, we talked about not underfunding depreciation. And I know we've had that in other long-term plans, and then to keep rates down, we essentially had that conversation and we did underfund. I don't remember that happening this time. How did we get from let's not underfund depreciation to this graph? Can you just jog my memory?
It's a great question, and I'm going to pass that over to Caroline.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
In our financial strategy for the long-term plan, the strategy was to fund depreciation, fully fund it by the end of the 10 years.
Oh, okay.
So we weren't fully funding it all the way through.
Okay, and that was that previous graph?
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is looking at the financing sufficiency. So this is a projection based on your current plan of debt. I think the most relevant thing to look at here is the debt to revenue ratio. So that's the constraint that's sort of typically applied in terms of financial covenants by LGFA. This is just looking at Three Waters alone, so it's a little bit different to how you would usually look at it as a council. And I think the important thing to note is that the only real binding constraint on council in terms of that ratio is a whole of council picture. But this is still a useful view because it indicates what's happening with debt attributed to water, or that's being accrued as a result of investment in water. And what you can kind of see there is that net water debt to revenue increased from just around 1% in fiscal year 19 to around 110% in the year just gone. And over the next 10 years, it's projected to increase to around 380% by financial year 32 before declining slightly. And it's declining because in that previous graph showing revenue, you could see the real ramp up in revenue towards the end of the 10-year period. 380% debt to revenue is not especially high for water services. So it's normal because water is a long-lived asset and it makes sense to borrow to spread the cost of the funding of that asset over a long period. It's normal to run water services at a higher level of gearing than non-water activities. And you'll see many councils around the country that are running their water borrowing at higher ratios again than this, sort of upwards to sort of 4 or 5 times. So when we look at this from a financing sufficiency perspective, it's not a debt issue for Napier City. It's more that revenue path issue that we identified on that revenue sufficiency slide. So there's nothing especially concerning, and this would certainly satisfy that aspect of the requirements. Okay, so moving on, what we've done here is we've looked at affordability through the lens of water revenues. It's a simple metric. It's water revenues divided by the number of connections, and we've looked at that combined for each of water, wastewater and stormwater. And you can see that in the current financial year, you're sitting at around just under $1,000 per connection on this basis, and reflecting the increases in revenues on the earlier slide that you can see there, that it's increasing relatively consistently and then accelerating over the latter part of the 10-year period, but it's still not reaching that sort of $2,500 limit. So, well, sorry, not a limit, but it's limit on the graph. There is, I mean, those are what we would observe again in a relative sense is that's starting at a relatively low starting point. There are a number of councils around the country that are already at $2,500 or above that. And the next slide puts that into a bit more context. So we've looked at that in terms of as a percentage of the median household income. Again, this is there are many different affordability metrics that you could look at, and this is just one, but it aligns with a commonly used international benchmark for affordability. And what this shows is that even with those projected increases, water charges remain well within that sort of international affordability benchmark.
So I guess going forward with the work that we've done today, a few things that we want to do to then, enhance the model is to look at that capital program. And then one thing that we'll have to do is investigate alternative delivery models to meet those requirements of financial sustainability that we just discussed. So within the capital program, we're reprioritizing the 10-year program to achieve compliance earlier. That work is currently underway, as well looking through the 30-year CapEx program to then smooth out investment to meet things that are going to be more achievable, bring what we think will be required earlier back into maybe year 14, 15, just to give a greater view of what investment's going to be required over a longer time period. We're updating our master plans, so stormwater master plan, currently working through the water supply master plan to give us a greater clarity of what is going to be required in investment, especially when you think of compliance that's going to be required or level of service. And then as well, we're currently developing a planned renewal program that sets out not only to be more proactive, but clear the backlog as well. And with that, hopefully that'll make deliverability more achievable. If you have a really well planned out renewal program, you can have that enacted in greater success year in, year out. And then obviously just when it comes to delivery models, so this is something obviously I think for future workshops that we'll have to consider is, and go through some of the options potentially for the current delivery model and how that can be enhanced. Looking at a single council water services CCO, investigating the joint water services CCO, and then determining what that preferred model will be. That will be outlined in the water services delivery plan and how that will be implemented. And then again, conducting public consultation on what that preferred option looks like.
Hi, Davey. I note that the government put out 5 different ideas of models, and we haven't put any of the ones in that include like like the Power Consumers Trust or a Water Consumers Trust. Have we written that off the board, or surely that would be something for us to include to think about?
Yeah, I think we trying to think how that one would be done at the regional level, and then I think one thing that's looking at it is that financing sufficiency, and through a water or through a consumer trust, you won't be having that borrowing capacity through the local government financing agency, the LGFA. You'd have to be going into the private sector to achieve borrowing, and to prove creditworthiness would be an obstacle. So we are discussing, I suppose we could go and look at further investigation of what it would require to meet the demands of the private equity market. Nick, you might have some thoughts on that as well, though.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that in terms of access to local government funding agency finance, they've made it clear that they're prepared to lend to a CCO model, and on the basis that there is some ongoing support from the council, whether that's through a joint and proportionate guarantee or through the provision of uncalled capital. So that's, from the LGFA's perspective, they're extending existing lending arrangements that can exist for CCOs currently to new water services companies. They've, at this stage, said they remain open sometime in the future to potentially lending to other forms of more independent companies, the water companies, but there's no certainty around that, and it's unlikely to be the case that they would be prepared to do that in the near term. And so what that requires then is, in order to set up a water services organisation that is completely separate from council, which would be, which is where those kind of consumer trust models come in, those organisations would need to be set up to achieve investment grade and the ability to borrow from banks or capital markets, and that will be a challenge in the short term to achieve. So they may be models that you might see potentially used in the future, but certainly in the discussions that we've been having across a number of councils, the options that are most being looked at in most detail and most seriously are those options in the left-hand 3 columns of that table.
Yeah. Just from a decision-making process, I think it'd be good for us to see the pros and cons. I take your word for it, but it just feels like if it's going to be written off, it probably should be written, the idea written off by us. Is that? And so
I agree. I think it would be good to have that rationale provided to us, just so that we have the understanding of why we're not pursuing those any further. I think it's also worth noting that our Hawke's Bay model, the preferred option with that was a CCO. I don't know how much investigation was done into those alternative community trust type models, but I know that we had definitely landed on it being, when we were working through that process, we had definitely landed on it being a CCO for that. So that might also be worth sort of having a look back at how we landed on that in our Hawke's Bay model.
Yeah, I do recall the conversations being had. But
I don't know if you can hear.
Yes, go, Louise.
I don't know if you can hear me. I'm so sorry. My internet's so bad. So they have been discounted largely because there wasn't capacity and time to investigate them. So in terms of the work the RRA is doing, it's only looking at the multi-council, recognising that councils are individually looking at either retaining in-house or going for a single CCO model. So there is no investigation being done on those other 2 elements, and that was because of time, capacity and resources.
Russell's going to pull together a report which will take the information we've just had shared with us here around the limitations of a community trust model, and then perhaps if there is anything that's relevant from the Hawke's Bay model to include in it as well.
Yeah.
Not necessarily worried about the result, it's more that we're following a process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Councillor McGrath.
Through the chair. Couple of questions. Your facts and figures, they all come straight out of the LTP of based around like 41 million last year for 3 waters. Now, knowing I think that we only completed about 19 million, has that been factored into your projections there? I think we haven't been hitting their targets for a few years, and you might have come up with a percentage. Have you factored that in, or just gone from what we say we're going to deliver?
Yeah. So what we are doing is we're holding up the mirror. So we aren't doing our own modelling or second guessing the council's projections. So we've taken the numbers that have been supplied to us by the council, and we're sort of reflecting them back through this framework. In terms of the historic numbers on the charts, they're all actuals. In terms of the projections, my understanding is that there is a factor in there to make an allowance for the fact that capital has been not delivered to budget in every year. But somebody else from council might want to comment on that as well.
And another question, and that.
Oh, sorry, before we move on, can we have an answer to that?
Come from council.
So have the figures in here been adjusted for under delivery of the capital program?
You have to ask somebody with who's done the figures. Is it Andrew or?
I believe so.
No, they haven't.
No.
So
The
we've
3-year plan.
Every year on year, we've assumed that the capital program will be delivered. In reality, what happens, say for instance, if you only deliver half of your program this year, that remaining half gets pushed onto next year. So say in easy world, you've got $100 million each year. You deliver $50 million this year. Next year, you've got a program that's $150 million. So yes, you're quite right. The projections then in terms of your borrowing and your interest will change based on your delivery, but we haven't put that level of complexity into the model yet.
Thank you.
I'm guessing those bars will start.
Yeah, it could be a lot worse, yeah.
And I guess the second question, the country's going through all sorts of RMA type stuff now, and consenting and all that sort of work seems to cost us millions of dollars and millions of hours. Any indication whether that might sort of head downwards, or to save us time and money? What's the feeling out there?
I'll answer that one.
Yep.
So that's exactly why the government and Te Mata Arawa are delivering the wastewater standards, for that very reason. So they'll be providing standards across the country, which will then help with that consenting, because there'll be minimum standards. So if you're meeting those standards, then essentially you're consented. How that process works, we still don't know yet. That's still being developed, but that's the intention of those standards, is to actually reduce the costs for wastewater infrastructure.
Thank you.
There could also be those national engineering design standards being introduced to improve deliverability as well.
Yes, so through that, this was something that the DIA and the NTU developed in the previous government, was the National Engineering Design Standards. So this is how you build your pipes and your pump stations. It's not treatment plants, but it's just your normal kind of stuff. Fortunately, that work got put on hold, but we're hoping through Bill 3 coming through at the end of the year that there'll be information in that legislation to bring back those standards as well. So again, another opportunity for us to nationalise the way we do things, which will then not only cut costs in construction, but also in operations and maintenance, because there'll be a standard, say, Toby across the country and a standard meter box across the country, which will bring costs down as well.
You don't want those meter boxes.
Sorry, wrong word.
They won't fit out one.
Yeah.
Councillor McGrath, you've just led on to my question. Has any of the financial modelling included water meters?
No.
No.
We don't have them in our long-term plan, so they won't be included in the modelling.
Water meters.
Maxine?
Yes, if we agree, or if we think we should have a joint CCO, then all the relevant councils will have to all agree with that. And we talked about this at our collaborative meeting, because we all have to go out to our respective communities with, I guess, our preferred option, and we all have to agree, because it means every council, if it's going to be a combined CCO. So the timelines are going to be really tight. Very tight.
They are, yes.
Yep.
Any further questions?
Hayley?
Got a question, I'm not sure if it's directly related. It's about how the level of service is obtained. And I'm thinking sort of specifically about the wastewater outfall and thinking about how we've got here in terms of the sort of mess that we're in with Three Waters. And I think part of it was that we were measuring ourselves against legislative changes, whereas best practice and community expectations were going up and legislative changes stayed the same, standards stayed the same. With a major thing like the outfall, are we actually going to wait for the legislative changes and do the bare minimum, or are we going to go, right, best practice and community expectation is that we look, like, could we go to that level and then not have to wait? I don't know. And I suppose that doesn't actually help us define a model, but it's just something that's running around my head.
Yeah, through the chair. At this point in time, it's really the RMA, the legislation that we're working under through the regional council and their water plans. And so at this point in time, we're compliant with their rules and regulations for an ocean discharge. So, and I guess that's the historic investment that we've invested in the plant. So there is a lot of we've had a lot of conversation, particularly after the cyclone, with Mana Whenua and other agencies that they are interested in us improving our treatment prior to discharge. We've been starting to talk to them, and we want to get them involved, particularly with the change in legislation with these new standards, because that's the starting point for the next stage of our upgrades and the engagement for what level of treatment we'll need to do at the plant. So it's not an immediate change, but it is. We do see that as, I think it's in the 30. I want to say 37. I can't remember when the resource consent is going to the water quality. It is 37, yeah. So that's quite a long way away, I guess, in terms of capital, but we're getting into that feasibility and planning now. So we're trying to set that project scope and what that might look like for us in the future. So not quite gold standard type approach, but it's trying to understand what the community expectations are and then define what solution we need to meet it. Yeah.
I think it's really important to remember, though, that our starting point is compliance.
Yeah.
We just do not have the financial means to commit to anything beyond that. So, in terms of next steps, the regional modelling is being done at the moment.
At the moment, yeah.
Yep.
With a workshop on that set for October 22nd.
Yep.
Outcome from that will kind of, I think, determine maybe the path forward, but anticipated a further workshop in late November, early December. We're just trying to arrange the timing of that. And then ideally bringing a paper to council in December on resolution for community consultation on a preferred option.
So ideally, you're looking for guidance around the preferred option late October, early November at the next workshop?
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's, it will depend on the modeling from the regional recovery, like that might be just.
Yeah, I don't,
Louise.
Louise?
Yes, sorry, I don't know whether you can hear me.
Yes.
So what will happen is there will be a briefing with the mayors and Cs next week on the RRA modelling, which was done by PwC. Then we will get I'm still waiting on our refreshed data from the multi-council modelling. We will then be having a workshop with you where we'll also invite the RRA and PwC along to talk about their modelling. Andrew, Russell and the team and I will be working with the RRA to compare and contrast the two different pieces of work we've been done. The aim then being that after our workshop with elected members on the PwC modelling, we'll bring a paper. That paper will be consistent across all councils, but with an appendix for each individual council. And the decision we'll be seeking there is for each council to agree to go forward to look at a business case. If we get agreement, I mean, effectively, we only need Hastings and Napier to agree, because the model only works if both councils are in. So providing both councils agree, then we would go forward to develop business case modelling. Then once that's been available, PwC will then run individual workshops with each council, with Andrew, Russell and I obviously helping too, and the RRA. Once that workshop's been held, then each council gets a standard paper again with their own appendices of some more detail, and if there's specific areas that a council would want in going forwards, I guess. And that will come in December, and the direction that we'll be seeking or asking from all of the councils in that paper will be to take forward the consultation in the new year to the community on the preferred model. So it's kind of like a number of stage gates, but that's currently how it's looking, as if that's going to roll out. That by Christmas, the only decision that we really need is, well, two decisions we'll have need before that is one, to go for business case modelling for a multi-council CCO, and then secondly, to go out to the community for consultation on that model.
Thanks, Louise. So at what stage in the ensuing couple of months, you're aware that the mayors had discussed this morning about each council putting down what the non-negotiables were and what they were seeking in terms of outcomes for their communities. At what stage will that information be required?
Yeah, so obviously I need to catch up with Julia after this morning's meeting, but I think we would want to be bringing that through as early as possible, because it may be that effectively will mean there's a go, no-go decision earlier. So, for example, there may be something we want to put into the multi-council CCO that we know the others won't agree with. And so therefore, as I say, if Hastings or Napier pull out at any stage, then the multi-council model doesn't stand. The multi-council model can go ahead with just 2 councils. I'm just talking on the financial aspects, not obviously on the wider community aspects, but financially it can go ahead if Hastings and Napier are both in. It cannot work if Napier or Hastings are not in. So I think that early discussion around what those non-negotiables might be may well determine whether we reach an early stage of kind of go, no go consideration. But I just need to have that conversation with Keriana and Julia to understand what those things might be.
Okay, so the next workshop on the 22nd, when we're actually getting to see the regional modelling, might also be a good opportunity to have that conversation.
Yeah, and obviously we've got so the mayors and CEs will get PwC and RRA taking us through the data next week, and I guess by that point we may well as have a bit of some direction about what those items might be. So we might be able to get a sense next week as to whether they fundamentally impact the financial model.
Okay. Right. That brings us to a conclusion. Excellent.
Might be the end for us, but it's like the beginning for you.
Thank you very much. Have we got this on the